Tania AEBI, let me welcome you to the America I Want Is Talking Circle. You have done, when you were quite young, 18, I believe, something brave and remarkable. And I would like to start this interview by asking you to tell our viewers exactly what it was that you did.
I sailed around the world by myself on a 26-foot sloop, leaving from New York, returning to New York when I was 18, and I got back when I was 21 and about a month. Visited a lot of countries, had a lot of adventures. It was great. It was a great story to live with for the rest of my life.
Actually starts with your graduating and not knowing quite what you wanted to do with your life, and your father stepped in. Tell me about that.
Actually missed my graduation. I didn't even know for sure that I had graduated because I went to an alternative high school, and when we left, it was a credit or no credit program, and I hadn't seen the final results. And we left before that to go to England, where he had bought a boat, and we sailed with him from England to Spain to Portugal to Morocco to the Canary Islands. And then I came home for a while, and then we went back out again with my father. We came home and I found out I had graduated, and went back to the Canary Islands and sailed across the Atlantic. And it was there that he came up with the idea. It wasn't my idea. My dad wanted me to have a plan. He was always somebody with a plan, and or more than one plan. And it drove him crazy to think that I didn't have one. I was at loose ends, and he suggested this trip. He said he would fund it, and in return, I'd have to do it, write about it along the way, and do it by myself.
Having sailed with you, he must have had confidence in your ability, because you didn't start this project, this life's project in a sense, with very much experience.
Well, I did spend that year on the boat with him, and during that year, he saw that I could learn and that I loved it. That's what he actually saw. But also, my father's a very unusual person / parent. He did things and wanted things that weren't pretty typical. You know, I had my own son many years later, who was at 21 or 2, he was graduated as an engineer from the Merchant Marine Academy. He knew systems, he knew how to sail, and he was going to deliver the boat I had at the time down to the Caribbean in November from Newport, and the weather was so bad. I kept watching the weather reports. I was going to be his router. I ended up pulling the plug on him, on my 21-year-old engineer son, on a boat with much more equipment than the one that I had. I couldn't do it. And that's me, given my experience and everything. So yeah, I've been saying for years that the biggest act of faith and courage in this whole thing was my dad's, but he's also unusual.
Now, your dad actually was born in Switzerland, is that correct?
He was born in Switzerland and raised there, and when he was 18, he took off and hoofed it from Switzerland to Japan, across, Europe, Eastern Europe, Central Asia, all the way to the Far East by land, with tons of adventures. Those were the stories that put us to bed at night, were all his all his adventures out there that he had with the world, and meeting people and seeing the world. And that kind of always was something that resonated with me. I wanted to also see the world and meet those people and have those images for my own.
Your father's stories actually became part of your worldview, the way you understood the world and your place in it. And you wanted to
accessibility to it. It was possible. One could. And then getting on a boat with that trip we did, that showed the means for getting there too. It wasn't hitchhiking with a backpack. It was traveling with your own home with you everywhere. I really loved that. I loved having my own little bed and my own little stove and my own little world, visiting the rest of the world.
It's interesting that your father should have had this impulse, given the fact that although Switzerland has produced some great explorers, that it's one of the one of the safest countries to be raised in. It's with its well-known and famous safety net. What sort of sense of Switzerland did you have from your father? And the fact that he ended up living in the United States, is that significant?
I think that safety net and that the control that exists in Switzerland chased a lot of Swiss people out. You can go to the most remote mountaintop and there will be a Swiss person up there living or visiting on boats. There were Swiss people on boats on every island, people settling all around the world. There are more Swiss people outside of Switzerland than in Switzerland. And he was one of them. I mean, it's a much more, that safety comes with restrictions on personal freedom, and you can't even name your kid whatever you want to name them. There's a dictionary of names you're allowed to use. Yeah. So, they don't want you to be too weird. So, the weirdos left, and he was one of them.
So you started off your life with a very, very strong story. I want you to tell me how that story has actually developed and your perception of it has changed as you have matured.
I guess the biggest growth in perception came as a parent. Like I said, having had the father that gave me that chance and believing in the possibility of making it happen and not being crippled by the fear of all the things that could go wrong, but instead being buoyed by all the things that could go right about it. That's what drives him. It's the eternal optimism. And that as I came out of that trip, I'd always talk about how I'd never take running water for granted again, a dry roof, a shower, washing machine, a kitchen, just like all those comforts of civilization that I had lived without for 2.5 years. I just grabbed it and embraced it. And those were, in the beginning, that was the big, I don't know, what's the word? The not taking any of that for granted. That whole experience shaped my parenting too. I was much more into making everything always safe for them and controlled for them. The not knowing every day and always the uncertainty. I probably came out of that a little more shaken than you would if you had lived on land, just by the uncertainty of every day and having the engine always breaking. It was always on the edge of, I felt like I was always living on the edge of a disaster, like anything could happen. And I was always braced for that. And that's kind of life. It's like you just keep going day to day. I'm not very good at planning into the future. Like I can plan the next couple of weeks. I can plan trips. But not. I don't have a retirement plan, for example, because you never know what's going to happen, and you spend all that time planning for something way down the road. And right now is when you need to be paying attention. And you've asked me a question that has to make me analyze myself a little bit. I don't do a lot of that either. The self-analysis. You just keep going.
Your father was willing to take a risk on you, and in a way that you were not necessarily willing to take a risk with your own children. Is that?
No, I couldn't have done that for my own children. Like I said, I didn't. When I was given the opportunity, I couldn't do it. While I was waiting for the weather to get good for him, I couldn't talk, I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. I could not have a coherent conversation. I was just such a wreck until I pulled the plug and said, get a job instead. And he did, and he's fine. But the images that were going through my head, it's probably because I knew too much too. My dad didn't know as much as I did when he gave me that chance. When you get through things like that, you come out stronger.
The question is, as you go around now, and I understand that you give talks, you have written a book called Maiden Voyage. You talk to young people, I imagine, many who listen to your story. What exactly is the lesson that you are trying to impart to them?
I don't know that I'm necessarily trying to impart a lesson as much as just, leading by example, by telling that story. And it's not about getting on a boat and challenging yourself to sail across the ocean. It's just And this is what I tried to teach my kids. That was my big takeaway, was not quitting. You know, you make a decision, you set yourself like that goal. My goal at that point was to get around the world in one piece. And no matter what happened, I came really close to quitting a bunch of times because it was hard, but I didn't, because somehow in that young mind, I knew I would live the rest of my life knowing that I had failed, that I had quit. Failing would be another thing. If I'd sunk or whatever, that would be another story. But if I just quit because I didn't want to deal with it anymore, that would have been something that would have followed me through life. And that's something that was a parenting thing for me. It's like, you don't quit piano lessons. You don't quit taekwondo until you've gotten your black belt. You don't quit. You start something and you stick with it until it's done. And then if you don't like it, you don't have to keep doing it. Then you find something else that you like better. The story is a larger than life example of not quitting. I'm not saying that everyone should try something. For some people, just going outside or going to Europe for a trip, those are really big deals. And to just pull it off, because you have no idea how the universe will conspire to make something happen until you've tried and you've put your best effort into it. And that's what I learned time and again. It's like, no matter what the world threw at me, I overcame it by just trying, by surviving, by, using my brain and wits or whatever it took to get through each difficult moment. When I almost sank, or I didn't almost sink, but when I got knocked down and I thought I was almost sinking, everything happens, gradually. Nothing happens very fast on a boat. It's all at 5 miles an hour or less. I started cleaning out and picking up the boat and bailing it out and realizing I wasn't actually sinking, and kept on going. And it was always keeping on going, heading west, heading home. And the beauty of that whole trip, which the rest of life hasn't given me and rarely gives anyone, is the clarity of purpose. While I was out there for 2.5 years and at a very formative age, I knew exactly what was being asked of me, and that was to get west and get home. It was pretty black and white.
What might be a sense of purpose in life? When young people talk to you and they say, well, I don't know what I want to do with my life, how do you help them?
By listening. If a young person talks to me, that's something I learned. I have tend toward the advising, like giving answers, but everybody has to find their own answers. And I've learned that listening, people do know what they want in the end if they've talked about it enough and they've thought, some people never find out what they want also. So all I can do is listen. You can advise people. Nobody has to take your advice. There's you got to figure it out on your own. And that's something that I've learned with age. I try not to tell people what to do, but to help them figure out what they want to do and support that.
If it had not been for your father, you would not have taken this trip that has been so central to your life. Have you ever imagined what you might have done had you not, been Tania, who circumvented the world in a 26-foot boat?
One of the things my father used to always say is, if my grandmother had wheels, she'd have been a bus. I don't know how much of me is nature and how much of me is nurture. And, if I hadn't done that, would I have persevered with something else? Did I learn about perseverance on the trip, or was I a perseverant person before I left? I don't know. At the age of 18, I was a mess. And that was a way that got me really, ironically, grounded by living that commitment. Because also, I got back from that trip and then I sat down for a year and wrote the book about it. And that was a huge part of the whole experience then, too. It wasn't just getting back on land and being like, whoopee, I can now take a shower whenever I want. I had to sit down and fulfill the terms of a contract to write the book within a year and take all that experience, all the writing, all the memories, all the dreams, and find the story in it that fit between the two bindings. That was a huge part of it. And that was part of the learning, too. The finding what the story was and finding what was important to make a good story that people would want to read, as well as I had to like the story too that I was telling.
My sense is, people, when we're, in our in our teens and early 20s to be completely alone on the ocean. And, there is probably no place other than perhaps outer space where you might feel so cosmically vulnerable, so cosmically alone. How did you deal with that?
I've described that transition from being among people and civilization, and the point where I could be alone and it was fine. It was like a withdrawal from civilization. It always took about 3-4 days after leaving every harbor to accept that aloneness and to stop. You don't realize how stimulated we are always by sight, sound, smells, all the stuff that goes along with civilization until you're removed from it and you're on a boat, and that really reduced stimuli. You've got the ocean and the boat, but all that other stuff is gone, and just myself and my thoughts. And I'd go through a withdrawal. It would take several days of really high anxiety and emotion and crying and agitation, like stopping smoking or something, until it got to the point where like I relaxed into the moment. And time became fluid too. It didn't even, it's like a trip that was 50 days was as long as a trip that was 20 days. In the end, time became kind of irrelevant. It was just day in, the days melted one into the other. And then again, like as I was making landfall, the excitement would heighten again. Everything would quicken. But while out there, I was pretty much okay. There'd be moments, I mean, you have hormones and moods and whatever that don't stay on land. They followed me out there. And so sometimes I'd be like, what am I doing out here? I'm supposed to be at my most social. I should be in college making lifelong friends, and I'm out here by myself. And that would be because I'd also left some people that I really liked and that I didn't know if I'd ever see them again. And saying goodbye was the hardest part. Saying goodbye to the friends I made and the people that I got to know out there.
Have you been surprised about young people's reaction to your story?
A lot of young people, like, I don't know, the different age groups. The really young ones are really interested in any shark stories, and they like the swimming and the shark stories. That's the one that always comes up with the really young kids. And then the older kids, it kind of fuels their dreams too, in the way it did for me. Is traveling is a pretty universal desire to get out there and meet other people and see the world, and that's what my story is all about. So that fuels it for them. I don't think a lot of them would ever want to be on the ocean by themselves. That's not going to happen. But I get emails from young people who want to do that, and who have had their own adventures alone or with other people. But there's the call of the sea that people hear, young and old. The other thing that I always say, and it was something that I learned, that I always say to people, is that nothing lasts forever. This too shall pass. That was a huge lesson too. It's like I came to trust that withdrawal period would always pass. That anything, any emotion, any tough time, as well as the good times, everything passes. It just does. And that's the story of life. Nothing lasts forever. And you just got to keep, soldiering on through the difficult parts to get to the good parts. And, not relax too well into the good parts, because they're going to end too.
How has that informed you in the way that you have lived your life since?
Realizing that particularly in difficult moments, that's when these lessons become more necessary, because when things are good. But is being, buckling down and getting through it, figuring out the best way to get through a difficult period, because one must, because this too shall pass. It will end. And only you can dictate the terms of that in the decisions you make and the way you approach it. Yeah, there are all kinds of outside influences that'll come in also. You can't account for everything.
How has that affected your life since that time? And have you sort of thought about second acts, or have you been haunted by second acts. And I say this because, you know, there are many people who athletes in particular, who peak early on simply because, you know, their sport requires them, you know, and does not allow them to continue. I'm thinking gymnasts who, you know, start at very early ages, and by the time they are in their early 20s, their career might be over. As you look at the trajectory of your life, how has it felt about achieving something so important early on?
It's funny because you bring up all these athletes are peaking early. I feel like I was able to check that success off the list. Like I didn't have to work towards something for the rest of my life. I got it done at 21, and then I could relax into having children and building a house and having I mean, you live in Vermont, you know, I mean, that's been my life's joy, is living here and growing older here and watching the trees I've planted grow with me and watch my children grow. And I know I have a grandchild. Those have been my life's pleasures. And I haven't had this like underlying sense that I need to prove myself in any way. The one other time that I did another big push, and I didn't really do it for myself, it was more for my kids, was I took them out of school for a year and got a boat and sailed with them from the Caribbean to French Polynesia. And then because we were divorced, their father took them for the second half. We took joint custody to sea. So they had that experience. And that was just something that as a parent, I thought I had to do. That was one thing that I always said I needed to do for my kids, was show them what had informed my life so much. Just take them out there. And what I really wanted to have with them was a good chunk of time at sea. And we had that. We were, I think it was like 33 days between Panama and the Marquesas. So they had that time with me and me with them on the ocean. On what had been my most beautiful passage also. And we had a pretty nice passage with the boys. And that was a huge thing. That was a big stressor. That was where I clung to that. You never know how the universe will conspire to help you to achieve something until you take that first step. And you put you have to meet the universe with your own effort. And I thought that I came up with that on my own. And then I recently reread The Alchemist, and it was pretty much in there verbatim. I'd read it many years ago, and somehow I had internalized that thought. And then it resurfaced when I was out there pushing through some huge fears. Because once I was out there on a boat with my kids, the fear that I never felt for myself, I felt for them. I wanted them to be safe. I wanted them to have a good time. I wanted the boat to work. I just never, and to make it all happen was a huge deal too. Finding a boat, outfitting it, equipping it, leaving our home here for a year, not knowing if they were going to like it. They ended up loving it. Both of them went to into the Merchant Marine as a direct result of that. They work on big ships, though.
The sea, the theme of the sea, has really run right through your life. You have introduced your children to it, and now it is, like a meme. You've passed it on to your children, and yet you live in landlocked Vermont. Tell me about that decision.
So do they. They both go off to sea and they come back here. They both have property here. They love it. They haven't been raised here to think that they need to go somewhere else. They love it. They have traveled, and they know coming back here is a gift. And we're very fortunate to be able to call this home now. And I just say we're a little surf and turf. We're always happy to go to sea, but if you live near the ocean, it's very crowded. The whole coast is just a corridor of box stores and whatever. It's just not. It's crowded, and we can go to the sea whenever we want to. I'm actually leaving next week to go bring a boat from the Balearics to the Canary Islands. So I'll have my dose of sea all of October. And then I'll come home, and I'll be very happy to be back.
What you did, Tania, in any way reflect, your concept or a concept of America? Can we tie that in at all to what you did? Is anything you did particularly American?
I left during the Reagan years, and we were my family, my father. He was before Reagan got elected. He said, if Reagan gets elected, it's going to be the end of the world, and that's something that stuck with me. It scared me, and then he was, and then I just had this, our left image of the world's thoughts about America with Reagan at the helm. But then when I went out there, if I met French people, we'd have lots of existential arguments about America versus Europe and whatever. But overall, people were people, and they didn't care where I came from. And people liked the idea of Reagan also, whatever. It was as an American traveling around, what really mattered was that I was by myself, and that I was a girl, and that I had stories, and people just wanted to hear stories. They wanted to hear my stories. They wanted to hear about New York. They wanted to hear about what life was like here, as much as I wanted to hear about their lives. And that's what we connected on always, was the level of our individual stories, no matter where we were from. So we get, the whole American thing. We just get, I think we're the most powerful and the best and whatever. And we're just America's made up of people, and the planet's made up of people. And when you get past all the national stories about who we are, people just want to be with their friends. They want to hang out. They want to tell stories. They want to, have food and love and all those basic things. But in the end, people want to be good. That's the other thing. That was my other big takeaway. Outside of Americanism, they just want to be good. They want to be helpful. I have the one story when I was off the coast of Sri Lanka. I got becalmed, and I hailed. People always asked if I ever got into any kind of dangerous situation with other, pirates or something as a female. Did I ever feel in danger? And I called this fishing boat over, and they had like 2 fishing hooks in the bottom of their boat and loincloths, and that was it. And the one guy got on the boat with me as they towed me closer to land, and they were with me for several hours. And the guy, we couldn't speak really to each other. There was sign language, and I'd show them things, and they towed me. And for years, I would talk about that as being the one time where, it felt a little weird being out there in the middle of the water with the 2 Sri Lankan fishermen guys. Anything could have happened. Nobody would have ever known, because I never had anything worse to tell. I never had a worse story. That was like the time that something could have happened. And then, years go by, and I get a letter from that Sri Lankan fisherman who did not speak English. He had to go to a letter writer and pay the person to write to me to say, hey, he remembered, meeting me out there. And he always wondered how things turned out. Did I make it home safely? How was life? And we started up a correspondence. So like the one example I used as potentially dangerous, or could have been, ended up being a pen pal with somebody that reached out through time and space to contact me to see how things had gone. And then when the tsunami hit, my family was able to send them some money so that they could rebuild and get another boat and continue. And he has died since, but his wife sent me the letter to tell me that happened. And so
all good in that sense.
It's all good. And what I'm saying is that people are good. People want to help. And the media and, the people, the bad stories still sell. Good stories are boring. Yeah. But I guess we're all bored because most people are good.
Have you ever questioned your father's decision? I mean, because what if things had not gone well? What if the boat had capsized, etc.? In other words, risk and reward. What if
I had died, you mean? Because that's the only thing that, if I had died, then whatever. I'm just one life, and billions served.
Yeah.
and it's better to, there's a million quotes. There are many quotes about the perils of not taking chances.
So really, the one of the takeaways from all of this is that it's important to get out of your comfort zone.
For myself, yes. Like I said, if I had died, I wouldn't know any better. It would have sucked for my dad. That would have been terrible for him. But for me, it wouldn't have mattered, right? I'd be gone. It's like when you're an idiot, you don't care. It's the people around you that suffer. But I yeah, it didn't happen. It's like if my grandmother had wheels, she'd be a bus. And I learned that on the biggest life stage, that, you know, what we're capable of. And so many friends, you know, when I first got back, people have said, oh, I could have never done that. How did you do that? How I could have never done that. And it's like, you don't know what you can do. Nobody knows what they're capable of doing until they're put into that situation. The fact that I took that chance, that I actually said yes and got on that boat, is another story. But once I was out there, I couldn't know what I was capable of until I did it.
But Tania, perhaps on a personal level, that is the story. That is the story of your life, that you took. You know, life is serendipitous. You know, you never know what's going to come around the corner. But when something good comes around the corner, grasp it.
Mm-hmm.
And you did that.
I know. I say that all the time when I play cards, because I'm terrible at cards. But I was like, you have to have luck, and then you got to know what to do with it. So even if I get a good hand, I still am not that great at cards. So I'm going to blow it with the cards. But, you know, we have some luck. And I had the good fortune of having a father who came up with an idea that worked for me.
You sent us a submission on the America that you want. What is it that you would, beyond that, what is it that you would want for this country?
Well, I guess it's a riff on what I said. It's just so polarized now. And I hate that. I hate how everything has become so, you know, black and white, literally. And it's like I said about my trip. We're all people. We're all functioning on the same plane of existence here. It shouldn't be like that. I don't know how it's going to change. I don't have a crystal ball here. And if there's truth to the pendulum, that it has to go all the way up to come back again, I hope that we're pretty much up there now, and that people are going to be able to, you know, meet on some common level of understanding, you know, what's right and wrong, and taking care of each other, and not letting all the politics and the media and memes, just all of that stuff shape our thinking, our actions, what we say to each other, how we treat each other.
Can Vermont say something to America?
We can only lead by example. You know, nobody wants to be preached at, but we can be an example. It's like, I can't tell somebody to sail around the world by themselves, but by having done it myself, that might make somebody realize what's possible. I mean, we can't browbeat people into anything.
Yep. Fantastic.
Maybe we can brainwash the rest of the country. I don't.
But do you see Vermont as being, you know, exceptional in this way? Is Vermont not a reflection of what is going on nationally?
Vermont's a little different, I think, but we're also made up of the same people that are everywhere else. We're all different here too.
Yeah.
Right. But we're blessed with being also in a beautiful place. Maybe that affects the consciousness of everybody. I mean, when you drive to work, you drive through beautiful places. You're not driving through blighted landscapes. When you do anything, it's, I don't know, maybe beauty. Maybe we have that, the blessing of beauty. And there's a certain I mean, there's different parts of Vermont too, but the thing that my sons and there's a certain resourcefulness that it asks of you to take care of yourself. We do know how much garbage we take to the dump every week. It doesn't just go into a bin downstairs. We do know about what our water, where the wells and where our water comes from. We do know where our sewage goes. You know, we kind of know about our weight, our impact, more so than people would ever in a city or in suburbia. And there's a lot of people in Vermont who live in that place. where we know our weight and our connection to the natural world.
That's nicely put. And is that beauty something that you would reflect back on as you were traveling, even if you were becalmed, or specifically when you were becalmed at the beauty of the oceans?
Always, always. It was just, you know, in the middle of the ocean, and I've said this before, there's very few places on earth where you can simultaneously feel so tiny, insignificant, and insignificant at the exact same time as you can on a boat, as you can feel like the master of your own universe. I mean, you're on a boat, that's your entire world right there. And at the same time, you're just this tiny little speck. And the beauty was constant, daily, even a storm. The majesty of a storm. I mean, or the you know, the strength of a storm. You know, that's where you realize it's like you're just it's what I was saying, this too shall pass, and how you handle it is what makes the difference between how you pass through it or not. The thing is, we're so America centric. The world is changing. When I did my trip, it was a much safer place. And when my father did his walk, it was even safer. It's like all this illusion of making our lives safer has gotten less safe.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, all the bubble wrap has made us less safe, whether it's from chemicals or, you know, politics. That's the other thing I wanted to say, I guess, about Vermont too. What Vermont has that a lot of the country doesn't have is that community and the town meeting, and where the volunteer base, where people do pitch into their own little world. You know, nobody's trying to change the big wide world. They're trying to make their town work. And people want their towns to work. And when every little town works, then the county works. And when the county works, the state works, and so on. And then when the state works, the country works.